Welcome to part 2 of our thinking process lessons. Today we'll discuss the second question, and we will look at a short part of Anatoly Karpov's game against Walter Brown. After this lesson, I suggest you write down the steps and start playing your games following the thinking algorithm. Whether you are playing online or playing with a friend, I want you to start taking your games seriously. Every game you play should be part of your training, not for enjoyment. If you're not ready to take things seriously, then these lessons are not for you, and you can get back to watching Gotham chess. At first it will be hard to employ the algorithm, but I want you to force yourself until you can subconsciously do it. Now let's begin our lesson. Karpov began with pawn to c4, typical of Karpov, choosing a strategically rich opening. His opponent replied with pawn to c5, going for a symmetrical structure. I believe this is often a strategy used by players who are afraid of their opponent, aiming to simplify the position as early as possible. White continued with pawn to b3, Black developed the knight to f6, White played bishop to b2, and Black responded with pawn to g6. For some of you, it may seem too early to start using the thinking algorithm, but if you're someone who doesn't enjoy memorizing opening theory like me, it helps to start using our system as early as move 3 or 4. Now let's take a look at this position. In this video, we're introducing the final question of our thinking algorithm, but as always, we'll begin from the very first question so you can see how every part of the system works together. So let's analyze the position. We begin with question 1. Do I have a direct win? As always, we examine the forcing moves in their proper order. There are no checks available, so we move on to captures. In this position, there is only one capture worth considering. Bishop takes on f6. Black recaptures with the pawn, and the position becomes stable again. At that point, we evaluate the resulting position. We'll study evaluation in much greater detail in the third part of this series, after we've completed the thinking algorithm and calculation. But for now, let's briefly evaluate the position. The evaluation method I use is based on 4 elements: material, king safety, piece activity, and pawn structure. Let's begin. Material is equal. The kings are equally safe because neither side has a realistic way to launch an attack at the moment. Next comes piece activity. Very few pieces have been developed, so there isn't much to say about activity yet. Finally, we examine the pawn structure. White has the better pawn structure. Black has doubled pawns on the f-file and a large hole on d5. However, Black also has the bishop pair, which provides good compensation for the structural weaknesses. Overall, the position should be evaluated as roughly equal. Since there are no significant threats we can create, we move on to pawn breaks. The only meaningful pawn break is pawn to d4. Black responds with pawn takes on d4. White recaptures with the queen. Black develops the knight to c6, attacking the white queen. White retreats the queen to d2. Now we evaluate once again. Material remains equal. The kings are almost equally safe, although Black has a slight advantage because the king needs only 2 moves to castle. Both sides have reasonably active pieces, but White is noticeably behind in development. Both pawn structures remain healthy. Taking all of these factors into account, we conclude that Black is slightly better. Because this line gives us a worse evaluation than bishop takes on f6, we immediately discard the pawn break. We've now examined all of the forcing moves, and found that none of them gives us a decisive advantage. So we move on to the next question. However, we should keep bishop takes on f6 in the back of our minds because, although it doesn't give us an advantage, it certainly isn't a bad move. Now we come to question 2. What are my opponent's threats? There are different kinds of threats. Some are direct threats. Others are tactical. And some are positional. Direct and tactical threats are usually easy to identify. Positional threats, however, are much harder to recognize unless you've studied positional chess. Once I believe your practical playing strength is ready, I'll begin teaching positional concepts in detail. Now let's return to our position. Here, Black doesn't have any immediate threats. But in the upcoming videos, we'll analyze positions with multiple threats, and I'll show you how to deal with them using prevention, defense, and counterattack. So you've answered both questions and still haven't found a decisive move. The only move we've identified is bishop takes on f6, which leads to an equal position. What do we do now? This is where planning becomes important. You first create a plan. From that plan, you generate candidate moves. You then analyze every candidate move and compare each one with bishop takes on f6. If you discover a move that's better than the bishop capture, you immediately discard bishop takes on f6. You continue comparing your remaining candidate moves until only the strongest move is left. Of course, creating good plans requires solid strategic knowledge in every phase of the game. We'll cover all of that later in this series. For now, I recommend studying some excellent books on your own. The first is How to Reassess Your Chess by Jeremy Silman. The second is Endgame Strategy by Mikhail Shereshevsky. As for openings, if your rating is below 1500, I recommend focusing on opening principles rather than memorizing long variations. If you're rated above 1500 and already know the principles by heart, then start studying the typical plans in your opening repertoire instead. If you find any of the material in these books difficult to understand, leave a comment explaining exactly which part confused you, and I'll do my best to make a video answering your question. We'll continue this game over the next 2 videos before moving on to more complex examples. So expect the next 2 videos to feature positions without wild tactical complications. But don't worry. By the end of this series, we'll have covered virtually every type of position you're likely to encounter. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.